right, hello everybody. As our participants are entering the room, I just want to do a quick welcome. Hello, my name is Andrea Sellers. I am the Assistant Director for Regional Engagement. And on behalf of the NC State Alumni Association, I want to say welcome and thank you all for joining us for the second night of our To Live Woke Diversity Education Series. As a reminder, if this is your first time joining us, we will be utilizing the Q&A function available at the bottom of the screen to submit any questions you may have for our presenters tonight. The recording of this webinar will be made available and sent out to all registrants following the conclusion of this event. It will be a 75-minute webinar, and we are really excited to get started. I personally am very excited to introduce Dean Braden. He has been a professor of psychology at NC State since 2003, and he directed the university's school psychology program from 2004 till 2007. Then he went on to become the college's Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies, and he was named the Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences in 2008. Before coming to NC State, Dean Braden taught and directed school psychology programs at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, San Jose State University, and the University of Florida. He holds graduate degrees from the University of California, Berkeley, Gallaudet University, and Beloit College. We are so excited to have you, Dean Braden. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and I want to welcome all of the Alumni Association who are here joining us for this book club. I am so thrilled. Not only am I a professor of psychology, not only is Dr. Nacoste a professor of psychology, but the guy who runs the Alumni Association is one of our graduates, Benny Suggs, former Rear Admiral, first got his undergraduate degree in psychology at NC State, and I'm delighted that continuity continues. It's truly a pleasure to be here. I will be moderating our debate in just a moment. We will hear from Dr. Nacoste, read from his book, To Live Woke. I have this by my bedside. I have this wherever I go, Rupert. I just want to let you know that don't leave home without it. It's like my American Express card. Dr. Nacoste is a professor of psychology. He predates my joining the faculty here by many years, and he is a social psychologist. Social psychologists study the way that other people, either present or imagined, influence our behavior as individuals. As such, social psychologists argue that all behavior takes place within a context, and that context is inherently social, defined by other people. Dr. Nacoste has made many contributions to our university, including as an associate provost, including as a professor of psychology. And quite frankly, although Rupert has many, many distinctions, my own personal favorite is he was the first professor to be invited into the Living Legends lectureship that was founded by then Student Body Government President Kelly Hook. And so I welcome the inaugural presenter, and essentially the guy who set the bar so high none of the rest of us can follow him, Dr. Rupert Nacoste. Rupert, welcome.
Thanks, Dean Braden. Thanks, Jeff. Good evening, everyone. Back 4 years ago now, at Raleigh's Quill Ridge Books, I facilitated 2 Sunday afternoon community dialogues. After having an event for the publication of my then new book, Taking on Diversity, and seeing the response to my way of taking and answering questions, the manager, Sarah Gooden, asked if I would consider doing more discussion groups at the bookstore. Thinking of the Marvin Gaye song from 1971, we came up with the idea of calling those sessions What's Going On. That fit very nicely with my book, Taking on Diversity, because that 1971 song, like my book, is about how our America was struggling with rapid social change. With the song, Marvin Gaye asked, what's going on in this way? Mother, mother, There are too many of you crying, brother, brother, brother. There's far too many of you dying. You know, we've got to find a way to bring some loving here today. Father, Father, we don't need to escalate. You see, war is not the answer, for only love can conquer hate. You know, we've got to find a way to bring some loving here today. Picket lines and picket signs, don't punish me with brutality. Talk to me so you can see, oh, what's going on. Even from 1971, Marvin Gaye's song, What's Going On, connected well with my concept of neo-diversity. Neo-diversity is our 21st century interpersonal situation where we all have to encounter and interact with people not like us on some group dimension. Race, yes, but it could also be religion, sexual orientation, sex of person, ethnicity, political affiliation, gender identity. And that neo-diversity is caused by rapid social change that can cause people to experience interpersonal, intergroup anxiety. Neo-diversity anxiety is caused by rapid social change that no one can stop. But that neo-diversity anxiety, like any anxiety, can make anyone just a little irrational. Tonight's section of the education series is Neo-diversity Conflict Points. All 8 short chapters in this section of the book for tonight have in common neo-diversity anxiety and its dynamics and consequences. For our reflection and discussion tonight, then, I'm going to read chapter 12, High Anxiety. Cowardly Lion's problem was not about him being physically weak. Cowardly Lion's problem was paranoia. Everywhere was danger, everywhere. Even when there was nothing visible, there was danger. That's the problem with anxiety. Left to grow, left unchecked, anxiety turns to paranoia. When it comes to the growing diversity of our country, Americans are anxious. That American intergroup anxiety is really about our growing neo-diversity. In fact, one of the problems is that we need a new language for these diversity issues. For some, it seems a long time ago. For some, not having been born, you can have no recollection of the days when Americans were talking about the Negro problem. From there, moving into the 60s, we began to talk about race relations. But then with the emergence of the sexual revolution, we started to include women's issues, and we began to talk about diversity. None of those labels captures the multitude of groups demanding equal treatment today in 21st century America. To capture that social reality, I have introduced the concept of neo-diversity. We need this new language to give us a better calibrated lens through which to see and understand the current situation in America. Some, though, have been confused by my concept of neo-diversity. Most of that confusion occurs because people are using their old understanding of diversity to try to figure out neo-diversity. Past usage of the term diversity was about making sure we were including members of particular groups that were in need of anti-discrimination protections. Hearing the word neo-diverse and neo-diversity, some have asked, well, who qualifies as neo-diverse? Well, neo-diversity is not a who. Neo-diversity is a what. Neo-diversity is the current interpersonal situation we live in today, where all of us have encounters and interactions with people who are not like us on some group dimension, sexual orientation, race, religion, and so on. This is a new situation in American history, because before now, we had all kinds of visible and invisible forms of segregation. For example, why are there all women's colleges in America? Well, because for a long time, women weren't allowed to go to college with men. Why, you might ask, is neo-diversity important to analyze? Simply because this new interpersonal situation, neo-diversity, can cause some people to experience intergroup anxiety, a discomfort about interacting with people not like me. Left ungrounded, left unchallenged, that anxiety will make a person lose perspective. Looking out on the expanse of uncharted interaction situation, creepy, haunted feelings can grow more and more intense, that high anxiety becoming paranoia. We must fight to keep our state straight. We must fight against the homosexual agenda. In their important little book, Freeman and Freeman define paranoia as the unrealistic belief that other people want to harm us. Anxiety about neurodiversity, anxiety about all of the people from different groups can lead to exaggerated feelings of the presence of them. Freeman and Freeman point out the problem that this can set up. They say, it's often difficult to completely rule out the possibility that a paranoid thought is actually correct. And it's precisely because it's so difficult that paranoia can thrive. Paranoia feeds on uncertainty and ambiguity. The answer is to judge the suspicious thought on the current evidence of threat and to exclude past experiences. Current evidence of threat. Take Americans' estimates of the percentage of the population of the country that is homosexual. A 2011 Gallup poll found that, on average, U.S. adults believe that 25% of the American population is gay or lesbian. Biological and social scientists who study populations are sure that the percentage of homosexuals in any human population has never gotten as high as 10%. 25% is quite an overestimation. I got really interested in this neurodiversity anxiety-driven overestimation. Here at North Carolina State, spring 2017, as a bonus question for research purposes, I asked both my classes to respond to this multiple choice question. One of the following is true. Homosexuals make up blank 50%, 35%, 25%, 10% of the American population. From among the 200 students in my sophomore level social psychology course, 60% of the class said they believe that 25 to 35% of the American population is homosexual. From among the 47 more educated college juniors and seniors in my upper level course, 56% also estimated that 25 to 35% of the American population is gay or lesbian. Biologists will tell you that is impossible because biological forces push for survival of the species through procreation. Why then are estimates so wildly off? What is it that today makes so many people believe that the homosexual population is exploding across America? Freeman and Freeman make this point in their book on paranoia. The way we think about the world then is hugely influenced by the number of times we hear an event and by the magnitude of its emotional impact on us. Objective facts cut much less ice. This means we're vulnerable to all kinds of irrational, unjustified fears, to paranoia, in other words. No matter the estimations made by individuals, there is no epidemic of homosexuality in America, no homosexual agenda. There has been no exponential increase in transgender people in America, no transgender agenda. Our situation problem is that there was a time in America when talking about sexual orientation and homosexuality was taboo. We used to hide from the truth that Americans could be very different from each other and still be American. To that purpose, the melting pot idea was pushed. No doubt the most obvious identities to be melted were racial and ethnic, but those were just the most visible. Attached to this powerful molten muzzle was also the identity of sexual orientation and, for sure, any transgender identity. Today we live in a different America, a neurodiverse America. Part of the neurodiversity dynamic is that people from many different groups are demanding to be heard, demanding respect. Today, no one wants to be, and no one will allow themselves to be, melted. June 12, 2016, Orlando, Florida, at the Pulse Club, a known gay and lesbian bar, a man walks in and shoots and kills, assassinates as many people as possible. The number of dead, 50. Even in the middle of that terrible tragedy, seeming to have been brought on by the hate of a group, LGBTQ people raised their group voice to be heard. In the immediate aftermath, on CNN, a gay man, still bloody from the carnage, looked into the camera and said, "We are not going away. We have made so much progress for the LGBTQ community, and this will not stop us from speaking out. We are not going back." Why are Americans overestimating the presence of homosexual and transgender people in our society? We used to push, shame, and shush people into the corners using violent, hot muzzles to keep those people quiet. We did it to African Americans. We did it when it came to women's rights. But then, with their own hands, members of those groups began to take off the hot muzzles. We, the people with unique voices, began to speak loud and proud, ripping the hot muzzle off race. I'm Black and I'm proud. Dismantling the hot muzzle on sex of person. I am woman, hear me roar. Pulling off and dropping to the ground and kicking to the side the hot muzzle that had been on sexual orientation. LGBTQ people have declared same love. Now America is experiencing an emotional, psychological rebound from feeling safe from them to anxiety from seeing them walk out of the corners and hearing them proclaim their American right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Voices that had been controlled to silence have, with courage, put their hands on the hot muzzle and with flesh burning, ripped it off and begun to speak up. Gay, lesbian, and transgender people who had been here all along have begun to use their voices to cry out for humane treatment and justice. Remember what Freeman and Freeman said about paranoia? The way we think about the world then is hugely influenced by the number of times we hear an event and by the magnitude of its emotional impact on us. Today, all kinds of voices are proud to proclaim, I too am America, hear me roar. Quite visible and vocal. The neodiversity situation of America is what is causing so much anxiety across our nation. Since it is now and forever unavoidable, we need to socialize people to respect that neodiversity as America. Pushing for respect of our neodiversity is one step we must take for preventing any more Wisconsins, Orlandos, Fergusons, Baltimores, Dallases, Baton Rouges, and Charleston. We've got work to do.
Thank you, Rupert. That was powerful and moving. And I just want to remind those of us who are on the call, if you have a question or a comment, please put it in the Q&A portion of the little button. If you roll your cursor down to the bottom of your screen, you should see a little menu bar pop up. Q&A should be one of those, and feel free to type in your question or your comment. While we're waiting for a couple of questions to come in, Rupert, I have a question for you. And as I read your book, I believe it was on page 94, you discussed a conversation with a person named Mark around the use of whether the appropriate use of how to refer to a wheelchair and the fact that he used a wheelchair.
Oh, yeah.
And I was particularly taken, not just with that comment. As you know, my background is in working with people who have disabilities. But I'm going to quote you something you said in your book and ask you to elaborate on it. Part of any growing friendship requires managing moments of interpersonal conflict. And you said that following the fact that he called you out, that he was not wheelchair bound. He used a wheelchair, but was not bound to it. And with that as a context, let me just ask you, as a psychologist, does that mean that there's actually something that's potentially beneficial about conflict?
So this
Please.
This is one of those things that when I teach my social psychology course, my students, their heads fly. Young people think, if I'm in a relationship and it's a good relationship, we always get along. We always agree. And I go, no. The theory that I work out of, interdependence theory, is very clear. And the data that go with it is very clear. That real dyads that grow stronger, must first learn how to manage their natural incompatibilities. Their natural incompatibilities. And so that means that every dyad has natural incompatibilities. You can't avoid that. As long as you try to avoid that, you don't have a real relationship. You don't get to know the other person. The other person doesn't get to know you. So yes, interpersonal conflict is necessary for relationship development.
So it not only is potentially beneficial, it's actually necessary.
Absolutely necessary. Now, one of the ways people get confused is I say interpersonal conflict is necessary. And people think I said people need to fight. That's not what I said. People need to acknowledge that they have incompatibilities. Why are interpersonal relationships so difficult to manage? I ask my students, and they say a lot of stuff. And then I say, the reason is this, is two people with two different social histories, two reasonable sets of opinions, and two reasonable sets of preferences. That's the setup for any voluntary relationship. So that means there's always going to be the potential for conflict.
So one of our listeners, one of the people on the call asked, how do I better listen?
How do I better? That's a really good question, because that's part of the issue that's going on in our country as we try to adjust to this new social environment. How do I listen? One of my students said, when I asked about relationships and the difficulties, it was a lot of people don't listen to learn, they listen to defend. They listen to respond. So how do you listen? You listen to learn. One of the things I say in the book later on is we have to have learning conversations, which means sometimes you simply have to listen. The story of Mark, who uses a wheelchair, was one of those moments. Look, I'm a professor, right? So I can act like I know everything. Yeah, but no. And he called me on my saying, I am not wheelchair bound. I use a wheelchair. And I immediately shut up, because I could see it in his nonverbals. I could hear it in his voice that this was an important moment. So I just stopped myself. That's how you listen. That's how you learn. You listen. You don't get defensive. If you feel yourself getting defensive, check yourself.
Create space for things you need to hear, but may not want to hear. Yes. Well said, Rupert. And by the way, I totally relate to that professor thing. Always, sorry, little inside joke by the academics here. Another question has come up. How do we ensure that teachers not only have a fundamental understanding of white supremacy and the caste system as living in ecosystems, but ensure that they use that knowledge to implement anti-racist protocols and engagement in the classroom and in their faculty rooms?
I have too many jobs. Oh my goodness. Oh, now you got me in the school systems. But here's the thing that's very interesting to me. When I teach my upper level course, Interdependence and Race, formerly called Interpersonal Relationships and Race, I have students sometimes who come out of education. And one of the things those students almost always say to me is, oh my God, we don't get anything about this in our curriculum as we're being trained to be teachers. Well, if we don't put that in the curriculum for teachers, that means we've let it loose when they go to teach. Will they teach this? Maybe. Do they know how to teach it? Oh, no, they don't. And that's why you see these awful stories sometimes, where with good intention, somebody's tried to engage their class around some of these issues. And it's just blown up in their face because they don't know how to manage it. They've not been taught how to facilitate a discussion, how to introduce the topic. So if we're going to deal with this in the school systems, we have to start training teachers to be ready to deal with it.
That truly hits home to me, because one of the things that has been a big issue for us in this college is how do we encourage and support our faculty to hold these conversations? Initially, when this was first presented to me, it was framed as a dangerous or risky conversation. And now we seem to be embracing a different language. How do we hold courageous conversations?
Yeah. I think the social environment, of course, has changed. America goes through transitions, shifts, as we move towards that more perfect union. And we're in one now. And it's a moment of hot conflict. And it feels awful. But this is the moment where we can change some things if we manage it well. So now what's happening is people have seen some things they've never seen before. The same way in the 1960s, the Birmingham situation was suddenly on television, and we saw the police using fire hoses on black teenagers. We're having another one of these moments where, because of cell phones, people are now seeing what's going on in the streets of America through the police force and going, really? And so now there's this outrage. And so this is a moment where we have the opportunity, because now the conversation is changing again, courageous. I did a conversation this morning for our College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, where the idea was moving from safe spaces to brave spaces. Courageous conversations. And all of this, all of the things I'm doing right now have to do with what happened, the hideous murder of George Floyd has just set off this energy. And so now we can have a real conversation. We can, because people see that there's something very serious amiss in America. Can't hear you.
I just muted myself, which is perfect for what Rupert would like in a dean. Pretty much all of his colleagues, but thank you, Rupert. So one of the things you mentioned is that society has changed. When you and I were growing up, society didn't recognize that there were gays, that there were lesbians, that they didn't exist. So the question would be, who gets to decide what we talk about, what society is, and who decides how people need to be resocialized to address that?
Okay. So one of the things, I talk to my students about this because they don't know. I say to them, when I was growing up, there was no respectful language at all for transgender people. Anything you said, if you said it now, right. It's just, you know. So who gets to decide that? Well, what's changed in America is the civil rights movement did a lot of stuff, but it didn't just change laws. It showed people in a lot of different groups that you can push for change and use your voice. Yes, sometimes it will be dangerous. Yes, it will, but you can still do it. You can organize and do it. So who decides? We, the people, decide. We push. I tell people this. People say, what should I be doing? I say, I have no idea what you should be doing. For example, am I somebody who's going to go on a protest march? Nope. I don't have the needs for that. This is not what I should be using my energy for, all of that. So what you have to do is find a thing that you can use to make a contribution. Not everybody should be doing the same thing. And that's how it was with the civil rights movement. Some people were protesters. Some people were working on legal defense. Some people were working on, and by doing that, we, the people, begin to raise our voices in different ways that have to be paid attention to. Can't hear you.
I just did it again. Well, so one of our folks just asked, how do you suggest we move a conversation forward when the other person or people don't want to listen, to learn? In fact, they act like they only want to listen for a breath and to tell you what you're wrong about.
Okay, very good. This is one of these issues that definitely will come up. Here's what I say. First off, you always speak for yourself. You never go at someone and say, you need to understand. You don't do that. That's not useful. Speak for yourself. I am seeing the world this way. I am going to live in the world this way. And when people don't want to do that, you just make your case. They don't want to deal with you. They say you're wrong, walk the hell away. But what you've done is model what you believe in. Keep doing that. Trust me, social influences is a very interesting thing. People think social influence is in the immediate moment. And sometimes it is, but very seldom is it that. Social influence is a seed. Social influence happens when you've made your case in a respectful, civil way and given someone something to think about. So many of us have had the conversation where somebody comes back to us and says, you know, I was thinking about what you said last time. That's social influence.
I appreciate it does not need to be immediate. It can be just planting that seed. Another great question we have is, how do you recommend that white and cisgender people take responsibility for equity without centering or inserting themselves, without taking attention away from the parties that have lived with inequity all their lives?
Sure. This is a real issue right now because sometimes protest movements are not people who are actually in the community. If you want to participate, one of the things you must do is move to a position of humility. What do? You go and say, I want to help. And then you say, what do I need to learn? How can I help? How would you like me to help if you would like me to help? On the other hand, in your social life, in your individual social life, you become a person who speaks up against bigotry in your social circles. So some people don't understand that allowing a friend, so-called, to make jokes, if you're doing that, you're not participating. You're not helping the equity agenda. You're letting people go by with their bigotry, and that bigotry grows. And some of those people hold very important positions. Some of those people are policemen. Some of those people are professors. Some of those people are teachers. So if they're doing it with you, trust me, it's in their head somewhere else. And you don't speak up against that, well, you're not helping. In fact, you're feeding the beast of bigotry.
You know, that really reminds me of a quote from Eldridge Cleaver in a book, Soul on Ice, in which he said, if you are not a part of the problem, if you are not a part of the solution, you are a part of the problem. There is no middle ground.
Martin Luther King Jr. talked about this a lot. And one of the things he said was, the greatest tragedy of this age will not be the vitriolic words and deeds of the children of darkness, but the appalling silence of the children of light. He was talking about those people who say they want to help, but they say they don't do anything. They don't take any risks. They don't step out. They're just quiet.
Can you give us an example of how you reframe a safe space conversation to be a brave space conversation?
Well, when I was talking to Cal's this morning, I was talking to an organization and a part of an institution. So what I was saying to them was to move from a safe space means almost the same distinction between diversity work and diversity and inclusion work. Diversity work is getting a certain mix of people around. So see, we're not discriminating. We got all these folks here. But do all those folks there feel like they belong there? Or have you done something in that environment that makes the environment inclusive? Which means you have to change some things or deal with some things at an interpersonal level. You know, if people still freak out when they see a Black person in the hallways, okay, you got a problem that you've not dealt with. You say, oh, we're all fine. We're all fine. That's a safe space. We're all fine. A brave space is addressing these issues that come up that make people feel excluded and finding civil ways, but consistent ways to do that.
In this current and really tumultuous social environment, what has surprised you most either at NC State or in your personal life?
I'm going to do the societal level thing. The thing that surprised me most is how I come from a military family. And I come from a family where my father was a deputy sheriff. What surprised me most is something has changed so dramatically in police culture, where there's so much evidence that police look at African-American men like me as a fear stimulus. That has surprised and disappointed me, because that's what we're seeing. And it's like, where did that come from? I didn't see that when I was growing up. What surprises me on campus is how much our students don't know. And I know they're young, I get that. I get that. But I have a student, so one of the things I use in my interdependence and race course is Tim Tyson's Blood Done Sign My Name, which is about a racial murder in public in Oxford, North Carolina in 1970-72. I have students who grew up in Oxford, who come to school here, and when they find out they're gonna read Blood Done Sign My Name, they say, oh, what is that about? I go, And they say, I never heard about this when I was growing up. That's so surprising and disappointing. Likewise, I show my students a picture of a billboard that I experienced as a young Black man driving from Jacksonville, Florida to Norfolk, Virginia, when I was changing duty stations in the Navy. And I came into North Carolina for the first time, driving, having a good time, hit Johnson County, and it was a billboard that said, welcome to Klan country. I have a picture of that. And I show it to my students and they go, oh my God, did that really happen? I'm like, do you not know the history of your state? If you don't know the history of your state, if you don't know the racial history, the question is, what are you being taught? And the second point is, what does that set up? Well, what it sets up interpersonally is people think they can joke about these things. It's not a big deal. If you know the history, you know it's a big deal. So.
Understanding context, as you said earlier. I'm really struck with what you also said about policing. I know that when I grew up, I always thought of police as guardians. And my sense is now they've moved to be warriors, right? To be warriors.
Oh, yes.
You know, to carry the fight and to frame things in terms of conflict rather than protection. And of course, you can't paint everyone with that brush, nor should you.
Oh, no.
But I do sense that moving things back will take time and will take energy.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing, though. People think that you're talking about individual cops. That's not what you're talking about. You're talking about a group dynamic, something that's been allowed to grow in a group dynamic that we call culture. That's what we're talking about. How do we deal with that? That's what systematic racism is about. What in the system has allowed this or has pushed this?
Norms govern behavior. They set limits, right? They don't prevent you from going outside those limits, but they certainly encourage you to stay within them. Mm-hmm. And I sense today we're starting to struggle with where those norms are and should they be recalibrated. Mm-hmm. Another question has come from our folks, which is, will you quickly define equity and what is the difference between equity and equality?
Well, there are a lot of ways to approach that. So social psychologists talk about it in particular ways. Societal equity would mean that people have the opportunity to, for their talents to be recognized and for their talents to take them somewhere. That would be equity. No matter, equality is you say everybody's going to get this. Equity is people can use their talents to go places that other people might not have thought they would. But here's the thing, why are we talking about that? Well, because there are some social forces at work that don't allow people to show their talents, or holds people in place where they say you're getting outside of yourself. You know, you're acting like you're smarter than you really are. That's not an equitable system, where somebody who has a certain group membership is expected to only go so far.
We have another question. What do you recommend that we do to convince people in positions of power at all levels to listen and engage in courageous conversations?
One thing is model it. 2, civil discourse. And 3, understand this. This is the hard part. You got to keep doing those first 2, even when things don't look like they're changing. You say convince, and that worries me a little bit, because usually when people say convince, they mean right now. That's not going to happen. Look, I have been working at this university for some 31 years. And with each administration, university leadership, sometimes I felt like I was banging my head against the wall. That doesn't mean I stopped doing it. It just meant I just kept pushing. Sometimes I was successful, sometimes I wasn't. And that's just part of what has to happen. You can't expect to just convince someone.
Keep your eyes on the prize.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. As a social psychologist, what are your thoughts about social media?
Thoughts about it. Well, look, here's a funny thing about me. When this all started, when the pandemic came and suddenly I have to teach online. Okay, I said to one of my students by way of Zoom, and once I figured that out, the end of last spring, I didn't do anything like this because I didn't know what Zoom was. I didn't know what Moodle was. So when my students found out I'd never used Moodle, they're like, what? So social media. I am on Facebook. I have a Twitter account. Yes. I use those as platforms for short lessons for teaching. I'm still teaching. I have some fun too, but social media is a very powerful social force in our lives. However, what we have to teach young people to do, and ourselves in some cases, is how to manage that as another thing we manage in our lives and not let it take over. So can social media be useful? Absolutely, yes. Organizing, getting people to a protest, getting people to think about different things? Absolutely, yes. Can it be destructive? Yes. It can be destructive too, because people get online and they're behind a screen and you see stuff you would like, oh. And we've seen people get in trouble that way, people with good intentions. So social media is this mixed bag. You don't want to get rid of it. I tell my students, I'm not asking you to get rid of it, but I'm asking you to manage yourself as you manage the use of these things.
Exactly, yeah. One of our listeners wanted you to repeat the name of the book, Blood Done Sign My Name. And
Tim Tyson. Yeah. Tim Tyson's Blood Done Sign My Name. It's a racial murder in Oxford, North Carolina in the 1970s. Literally a public murder. 4 white men shoot, beat, and kill a black man on the streets of Oxford, North Carolina. Tim Tyson was a 10-year-old boy when this was happening. He was a 10-year-old boy in Oxford. From there, he uses that story to tell the history of race in America. He interviews people now. He's a historian now. He interviews people. He uses documents. He does a lot of stuff. And he is a stunning writer. And so he pulls you into the story and forces you, by way of his writing, to just pay attention to what really happened. And he tells history. It's a history. It's a historical memoir, as I like to describe it. Tim Tyson's Blood Done Sign My Name. Blood Done Sign My Name, coming from some of the African-American spirituals of the past.
Go ahead.
One of the interesting things, maybe I shouldn't tell you, I'll tell you this. I don't tell my students this, I just tell them they got to read the book. I don't tell them so they can be surprised. And my students do this. They say they started reading it and they realize, wait, is this a white man? Yes, it is. This is a white man telling this history, a PhD in African American history. But yes, he's a white man, which just turns the way people approach the story in a very different way, which is why I use it.
As his father was a minister, and yeah, and we've had Tim Tyson come and speak to our creative writing program here at NC State, and he's done a couple of readings. I also want to mention, interestingly enough, I don't know if you know this, Rupert, but the College of Design is talking with the city of Oxford around creating a public space in the town square to memorialize those events. Yeah, we'll have to have this conversation offline.
Yeah.
You know, another North Carolina and alumna of our college asks a great question, and really makes a comment that growing up in North Carolina, she never learned about the Wilmington massacres either.
Oh, right. Yeah. One of the powerful things about Tim Tyson's book as a historian, a lot of it, he tells the story of race in America through North Carolina. And when he gets to there's a chapter where he talks about the Wilmington so-called race riot, but actually racial massacre. When students read that, literally, this is so powerful for them. They come to my class, they've written their reaction paper, we have a discussion. My students are livid. They are livid. They like, why was I not taught about this in high school? Why did I have to wait to come to college to learn about the history of my own state? Some of them are in tears, they're so angry. So yeah, we've hidden the history of race in America. We've told people it's all fine, we're all good now. No, we're not. And the reason we're not is we have not been addressing these issues. So young people don't know how serious it is. And so they think they can joke about Black people. They think they can joke about gays and lesbians. What's the big deal? Well, we haven't taught them anything. That's not on them. That's on the education system.
We have another listener who said, can you help us differentiate between the Black Lives Matter movement, which he believes is important, and political positions related to Black Lives Matter and the organization?
Political positions. I'm not sure I follow that.
I'm reading the questions.
Okay. So let's play with it a little bit. Black Lives Matter, powerful protest movement. Some people, I guess, have tried to attach it to a way of thinking about politics. So if you're liberal, you're Black Lives Matter. If you're conservative, you're not Black Lives Matter. If that's what you mean, that's another way of obscuring what's really going on. Trust me, there are people who are now marching with Black Lives Matter who would let you know very clearly that they're conservative. But here's the thing about that. The problem that people are seeing is an American problem. If you believe anything about what we declare ourselves to be in writing, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. If you believe any of that, you will attach yourself to the Black Lives Matter movement because you realize we're not living up to that.
I have to say, we had as part of our annual retreat in the college in our leadership, which we do every year, we had a speaker come in and she, a facilitator, and she said, you know, one of the rhetorical devices that people say is, why is it Black lives? Why isn't it blue lives? Why isn't it all lives? And she made the comment, if you're on a block and there are 20 buildings and one of them is on fire, you don't say all buildings matter. You say, let's put out the fire in the one that's burning. Does that analogy work as a rhetorical
I think so.
device?
I think so. I think it's kind of the same thing as the civil rights movement never put it in those terms, Black Lives Matter. But what the civil rights movement was saying that Black people deserve respect. And nobody could deny that Black people weren't being respected because of segregation, because of laws, because of all kinds of stuff. What we're seeing now is Black Lives Matter because we've gotten rid of the structural segregation issues. But now we see these individual issues where people, you shoot down a Black man and people go, oh, that's too bad. What do you mean that's too bad? That's not who we are. That person matters as a Black person.
We have a current events question from one of our listeners. And recently, President Trump issued an executive order essentially banning racial equity and diversity workshops for federal contractors and in the military. You mentioned frequently throughout your book that you were carrying out Zumwalt's orders to try and make the Navy a place where everyone was welcome. How do you see that order unfolding, and will universities be affected?
No, I don't think universities will be affected, but what I see is this. This is an attempt, and it's a political attempt. It's a political show. What people don't know about the training that all military forces receive as they are trained in boot camp and so on, is that rests on an institutional structure. People don't know that at Patrick Air Force Base, there's an institute put there by the Department of Defense, the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute, which trains people to train others to do, to help people get ready to be in the military. Notice what I said, help people get ready to be in the military. Not everybody who joins the military is ready. They may be physically ready, but are they ready to be standing next to a Black person? Are they ready to be standing next to a white person? Are they ready to be standing next to a Latinx person? Are they ready to be standing next to a gay person? And that becomes a mission readiness issue. And that's how the military approaches it. So this play on there will be no more training around racial issues in the military. The military is just not going to go for it. They will find a way to do this because they know they have to. And that's going to go away. Look, what Dean Braden was saying about my training. I was in the Navy in a very difficult time. Very difficult. The Navy was the most recalcitrant when it came to changing its policies around race. Before I was in the Navy, not that long before I was in the Navy, all you could be as a Black man in the Navy was a cook. That was changing when I was in, and I was not a cook. I was a personnelman. I had a desk job. Holy crap. And that caused problems for some white sailors who just didn't think Black men, and it was only men at the time, should have those kinds of jobs. And so we end up with race riots. Race riots aboard ships carrying weapons of mass destruction. Wow. In one of the forces designed, set up to protect the interests of this nation, sailors were trying to hurt each other. Well, the Navy could not let that go on, so they created an intervention, a training that all sailors, officers, and enlisted had to go through, of racial sensitivity conversations. I was trained to facilitate some of those conversations. I was one of probably 200 people. So that kind of training is about mission readiness. It's about making sure that people know they have a job to do. And it doesn't matter who the person is next to you as long as they're doing their job. That's not going to go away.
I also will just add that because the question also included what impact might universities have, our university is actually working to look very carefully at this order and think through, as perhaps some on the call, but maybe not all on the call know. Our chancellor has decided over the summer that all faculty, staff, and students will have training in how to be and be aware of diversity, and to both embrace it and to be more actively anti-racist. And so we're looking very closely at this order to determine what implications it might have for us.
That's very interesting because you just framed it differently. What the order that came out of the White House said was specific to certain concepts. Okay, so if you just reframe that thing, and that's what the military is going to do, they're just going to and keep doing it. They're not going to say those words.
Yeah, I tend to agree because, as you said, just like at NC State, our mission, our success depends on it.
Look at us. Yeah, just look at us. The idea that we would not address these issues in a campus of our size, the campus of the mix, the neodiversity mix of students, and we know that's part of the education process. That's part of the learning process for these young people. That's how we build leaders, because they have to go out into a neodiverse world.
Exactly, and we're here to serve the state of North Carolina, everybody in that state. And to do that, we need to be aware of and working towards including and respecting everyone.
Yep.
We have a question from someone who asked about campus initiatives. In 2005, there were study circles on race and ethnicity on the campus. What were the outcomes, and how have those kinds of conversations maybe changed the campus or not?
Jeff, I'm going to leave that one to you because I really don't know. I mean, the study circles things, as far as I know, they disappeared, but I don't know.
I will say that one of the things that often occurs in institutions is we start a program, we put a label on it, we say, look what we're doing. And then the question is, have we changed, as Dr. Nacoste would say, the norms of behavior and interaction? Because that's where it's at. It's not about a program. It's not about effort. It's about creating different interpersonal dynamics. We're saying racist, sexist, misogynist comments are called out. You know, not that they're forbidden, but just that other people will say, that hurts me. I don't want to be part of that conversation. If you want to keep talking like that, go ahead, but I'm out.
That's right. I'm out.
And I think that's a harder thing to change. But I do think that's where many organizations are beginning to realize that they need to go. What about churches, Rupert? Do you do much work with religious organizations?
Oh, what? I have had 3 Zoom calls with churches already. And before that, I was out in the community at churches, where churches are realizing that they have the same issues, the neodiversity issues. I mean, and so, yeah, I've been surprised and pleased. And I always say to them, really, you want me to come? You sure? Anyway.
We have a couple of questions that are kind of related. Do you have any recommendations for resources, books, podcasts, other kinds of things that can really help individuals prepare for and move into a neodiverse world? Look at that. I have one of those too.
The whole point of this book is, because I wrote it the way I said, I wrote it in short bits to give people time to process, give people time to think. And so that's one of the resources I recommend. There are other books, but they tend to be tomes. The other book I would recommend, though, aside from mine, if you want a historical perspective, is Tim Tyson's Blood Done Signed My Name. That will really hit you. Now, some people like podcasts. I don't know much about podcasts. I've been on a couple lately, but I know books better than podcasts.
Okay, you've just outed yourself in terms of your generational identity. I'm sorry, Rupert, but
Oh,
books
right, I
over.
know. Yeah, I don't.
So one of our folks comments, and I think it's a very interesting comment. A wise person once said 11 a.m. on Sunday morning is the most segregated
Oh,
hour
God.
of the week.
Okay, I was trying not to tell this story. So I've been called to churches. I shall leave the church unnamed. I was asked to speak to their Wednesday night luncheon dinner thing. One of my former students was a member and maybe an associate pastor. So it was downtown, or maybe I outed it, sorry. Anyway, I go to this thing, but the person who invited me, who made the arrangements with me, and the church invited me, did not describe me. They just were expecting Dr. Nacoste. And I make my students laugh about this. I say, okay, you tell somebody your professor's name is Dr. Nacoste, and then you say his first name is Rupert. What do you think they're picturing? Right, not this. So I show up at the church, and I find the lunchroom, and I'm trying to find out where I'm going. There's a whole bunch of people sitting at tables getting spaghetti, and I'm standing there trying to figure out where I'm supposed to be. And this man is standing there, white man, turns and looks at me, and he looks at me and he says, "Can I help you?" I was like, wow. I said, "Yeah, I'm your speaker for the evening." You should have seen his face. So yeah, churches need help too.
We have a comment from someone who first, Dr. Nacoste, thank you for your deep insight, and then follows up with a question with a little bit of a caveat. So the question is, do you foresee the public school system actually changing how they teach American history? Goes on to say, maybe it's my Gen X cynicism, but I don't yet see any updates since my children, who are now in high school, have been in school. Curricula are still just given a passing glance in the history of racism in this country.
The force that's going to move that is parents. But that means you have to build coalitions of parents. And it's going to be hit and miss. Because some school systems are going to be resistant because the parents are resistant. Parents have a lot of power.
I'm also going to take a moment and say that a number of our participants today are sharing some of the things that they find useful. Podcast from Duke professor John Biewen, Seeing White or Seeing Whiteness is quite good. The book Wilmington Lies.
Oh yeah.
Is powerful and has been recommended here. And of course, I do recommend Dr. Nacoste's book. One other question that has been posed here is, what do you think will be some of the challenges that the next generation will face?
Very interesting. Very interesting. That's a really interesting question. Hard for me to see with so much changing all at once right now. But if there's any change, I think it's going to have to do with the fact that one of the growing populations in American culture is interracial couples. And so people are going to have to step away from or learn how not to try to use skin color in this pure way. And I think that's going to be somewhat troublesome because people have been taught that you can always, it's a black person. You can always tell. No, you can't. And then they're going to try to use names. But now people are joining from different racial groups, ethnic groups, and it's going to become more and more unlikely that you can tell. And so that's going to have to drop away.
So we also have, first, again, a number of people thanking you, Rupert, for your work on this. We've got a couple of more minutes, but I'm going to ask you to kind of reflect for a moment and answer a question I think a lot of us are asking, which is, what what can you give us in these tumultuous times from your perspective as a social psychologist, as a Black American, as a veteran, as a professor? What can you give us that gives us hope?
Oh, yeah.
That gives us optimism?
Yeah, one of the chapters in my book is called Hope. In that chapter, I get to highlight my parents. My father was born in 1918. My mother, 1922. My father became a grassroots politician. They both came out of sharecropper families. My father worked to get some education. My mother ended up, through night school, going to college and becoming a teacher. They become my model. They become the idea that, yeah, tough things are ugly sometimes. Things are just ugly. But we live in this country where there are pockets of opportunity and the pockets are growing. Yes, there's resistance. There always has been resistance. Always. But the pockets, because we push, because we strive, because we show, are growing. I have transgender students who come up to me, Dr. Nacoste, I'd just like you to know my pronouns. You know, when I grew up, what? What? Nobody was talking about this. So our democracy is growing, and it has growing pains. But there's a quote I use. Let's see if I can find this real quick, because my students ask me this question. Well, I'm not going to find it. They asked me this question about my optimism. And my optimism is not always about changing things for me. My optimism is about pushing and helping the change so that it's different for the next generation. That's what my father did and my mother did. That's what I'm doing. That's what we all must do. Keep pushing. That's our optimism, that it can change and we can help that change.
I think the way the framers put it was in order to form a more perfect union. You know, the more perfect union is a never-ending struggle.
Never-ending struggle.
But I have to ask you one thing that really struck me recently, Rupert, and that is Doc Rivers being quoted when he said, "It's really hard to love America when America doesn't love us back." It's clear to me that you love America. Why?
Ooh. That's a really good one. I think it's because, I'll go back to my parents. They were never bitter. They knew there were problems, and they did not hide those problems from us. They told us in various ways, look, there are people who are going to hate you because of the color of your skin. That's their problem. Don't let that become your problem. And so the idea was always, make a contribution, be positive as you make that contribution, take care of yourself and your family, do what you can. My mother used to say it this way, Sha, don't worry about what you can't change. Don't worry about what you can't change, but work on the things you can. So my optimism comes through them. My brother is the same way, my sister is the same way. We laugh like our parents laughed. We still believe in each other, we still believe in other people, and we believe in America.
Well, I will close with this. I know we've got just a couple of more minutes, but Rupert, I would be failing my duty if I didn't read at least a few of these comments. I wish all alumni had signed up for these seminars. They could have benefited greatly. Thank you so much. Hi again, Rupert. I was your TA and later took your grad course. It is so good to hear how your dyad work has evolved. Thank you. Thank you for hosting this series and the approach of positivity, hope, and educating us. Thank you, Dr. Nacoste, for your work and contributions. You are a gift to NC State and to Chaz. I'll kind of close with this because I know we've got to talk a little bit about what's coming up soon, but one more thank you. Thank you so much. This session was even better than the first one. I appreciate your time, your heart, and your wisdom. Thank you. Oh, now they would kill me if I didn't say this. Go Navy, Semper Fi. And
Winds and falling seas.
I'll leave you just one more. I love America just like I love my children. I can be upset at them and want to correct them, but I still love them. And so we've got a lot of wisdom here, Rupert, that we're able to share. I want to add my thanks to everyone who's been participating tonight. I truly think you embody how we enrich not just our science, our academics, but also our lives in society through the kinds of work that you do as a social psychologist and the way in which you bring that into the very personal and very real domain. I'm sorry, this is going to sound a little trite, but I don't mean it at all in that way. You truly exemplify the think and do spirit. And so for that, I thank you. I also just want to say to those who are listening, the one thing that I didn't say in the introduction that I was very tempted to say, and I just got to add now, Rupert makes the best ham gumbo I've ever had. Just so you know, if you ever get an invitation, make sure that you take it. So with that, Rupert, I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to kick it back to our alumni hosts and invite them to talk about the next upcoming in the series. And again, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. I will echo that 100 times. Thank you again, Dr. Nacoste and Dean Braden, for taking the time to engage in such intentional and important discussions. And thank you all for joining us in tonight on behalf of the NC State Alumni Association. Just your friendly reminder that the next session will be on October 13th at 6:30 p.m. Registration is going to stay open for all of these, so be sure that if you love tonight and you want other folks to listen in, you send it to them, and we will have this uploaded to YouTube after the fact so you can share it with whoever who you think might need to listen in. Thank you all again for joining us, and I will close out tonight with a go Pack.